Hello, my name is Socrates, and the concepts presented may offend you.
Community values warning. Graphic content. The statement one makes when building a community in times of struggle, with violence and danger for simply existing, as a community is to be built around likewise ideals, now, with the combination of observations and experiences. I state the risks we produce when we maintain a social structure on outdated ideals. While things can be relative to the past strife, saying you would associate with someone simply on a merit of what they prefer sexually makes as much sense as a civil union between two people who like coffee, for community in half measures have side effects. And this I know is one, for where does one start on the villages and the homeless shelters they speckle in and near? Every place has the same setup, claim they're homeless, are homeless because their parent didn't want them for their sexual orientation, but in all reality, they're just folks whose parents couldn't take care of themselves, financially, emotionally or sexually. I've got a better grasp of the situation than people really need to know, but the risk of being solicited by a man, as a teenager, is infinitely higher. So to say there's a community built on sexuality, with desperate people in towns with wealthy folks, you can take a guess what happens when 15-year-old James gets sick of his piece of shit, wife-beating dad, more than looking at his sister. He goes to the street, maybe picks up a speed habit because coping with the situation is beyond his means. After a few weeks, the money he stole from his dad runs low. He notices that sitting on the street with a sign is just what poor people do, so gives a go. Couple police officers say, "Hey son, you seem a little down and out." He says yeah. To their reply, "You got a place to stay?" He says no, but don't worry about me. I've seen worse than the dealers. They say there's the refuge, just off Papino. There'll be food and beds. Keep your head right until you can get some work. But when you're a kid, homeless and no mind to stand around, taking orders after you see your family torn to pieces by a man who'd love nothing more than to see you and yours suffer. He goes onto the shelter, stays for a week, sees that it's not uncommon to be asked about sex by the randoms. People don't ask questions, they just say on it, and if someone sees them doing it, nobody says a word. Been there myself. To bat any aggressive words towards the person leads you to be scrutinized, like propositioning a homeless person for sex is even remotely acceptable. But after another week of wishing you could get a backpack and a longboard, right down to Nova Scotia, see if your family you never really knew is still down there. And you know that there's no way you'll be caught catching up over coffee and a job, so in the next few days, you qualm about the possibility of being with a man, of performing sexual acts and seeing what it feels like, as not everyone needs to experiment to know what they like. But while you wait, and days go by wondering, you can take a wild guess what happens when a couple of men say, "Hey, kid, wanna make some easy money?" He says, "Doing what?" To their reply, take a guess. He hesitates to answer, but ultimately gives in to the pressure. They walk to a street corner, find a taxi, and go for a ride. Takes about 25 minutes to get to their place, and when he gets out, he looks for a road sign. Nothing to see. But here in Montreal, you're lucky if you can tell where you're going without GPS, let alone what street you're on at times. But the one man says, "Seaman, the place is just up the stairs." He quickly is ushered into the stairway of a seedy apartment complex. And while he goes, the two men start chatting about him. Couple comments about keeping him, and then they reach the apartment. Taller guy says, "Welcome, you're in for a surprise." Shorter man walks into the kitchen, brings out a fancy bottle of whiskey. Being a kid, you don't care. You think, "I got this. I seen my dad drink half a bottle then talk the cops out the door before." So when he offers you a moderately full tumbler, you think, "I inherited his tolerance," so you take a gulp. They say man's got confidence gets him a little pumped. But after the second glass, James doesn't know what to feel, as he's used to speed, a whole other rush, being 100% the opposite. And he sits back, slowly doses, and thinks of that skateboard, the freedom of the open road, the backpack with life he's always wanted inside of it, and then he wakes up restrained, thinking what's happening. His ass exposed, and his face buried in a pillow. One of the men has him pinned to it with his hand, as the weight appears to be crushing his skull. Then he feels his weight shift and the man enters him, first gently, then not. and after about 5 minutes of screaming into the pillow, James gives up. First man says wow, finally shut up, and then another 10 and his friend takes his turn, but he's not like the first man. He starts whispering sweet nothings in his ear, then he hears the snap of a condom and he says, "You're gonna love this," and begins. He takes twice as long. Thinking he's romantic, giving love while all he could think was how did my sister stay? How did she do this for so long? And then after about half an hour thinking back and forth, he cries, and he doesn't stop. The smaller man is done. He cleans himself off and unties him. Then they say, "Hey, get in the shower and you get your money." So, he goes in crying, wondering why this is worth anything at all, wishing his family could have come. Could have stood up and said let's leave the old man and find someone new. But they were too scared to leave, she thought. He puts food on the table and a roof over our heads. We look forward to payday and dinners out. Then he drinks, and it always ends in this, abuse. Beats for me and Mum. Then he goes into Sis's room and stays for an hour. Mum says don't go in, she's okay, and then you snap back. You've been in the shower for almost an hour. They've been shouting periodically to get out. You feel yourself disgusted, with blood still running down your leg. But you put on the dirty clothes you had, and they hand you $200, then an extra $50 for a cab back, and your mind just wants to find peace, but as you leave, you think there's got to be more or something nearby. Wandering around not paying attention to the surroundings, and you meander about a mile, zigging and zagging through a combination of random clothes outlets and apartment buildings. Being about 2 in the morning until you see a parked cab. Try to flag it, but the driver's not in. You look around and wonder where he could be. Maybe he went into the convenience store over there. And you see a man with bald head and badge on his sweater. So, you wander up and say, "Can I get a ride downtown?" You try to act normal, because you're embarrassed of what they did to you, but you feel nothing emotionally, being dead inside, so, he thinks nothing of it. Maybe you had plans, and here in Canada, I've done some mighty strange things, to not have been questioned. He drives you and they meet says 40.80. He takes the cash and says, "Tip." And you give him another $5 and says goodbye. You nod silently, then you wait until morning and see if the shelter has breakfast ready. That's optimism, as you get no breakfast if you don't stay the night, but you eat. You take a wander down to Empire Skateboards. And you buy yourself the cheapest longboards they have. You have 29.20 left, so you buy a used bag, and you sit, thinking I've seen the worst of it, I'll never have to do that again, and your journey begins. You see the world pass before you, and as the days go by your pain comes back in folds. You start wishing you could just ride into the road and a truck might hit you, that there would be a gun laying out in the open, but instead, you find yourself at the edge of Quebec City. While you've barely eaten in 3 days and a driver gave you $25 to grab a bite. You see a group of kids your age, and they're smoking a joint and looking around for cops, so you say, "How's it going?" And they say good. They reply with, "You need anything?" He says, "What do you mean?" And the ride begins. They sell you some custom pot, $25 a gram, and he thinks, well, I could use a break. So gets some, smokes it, and lays in the grass not 25 feet away, nods off, because that's what heroin does to a new user. Wakes up, say oh no, looks around and his board is not under his head. The same guys that sold him the pot took his board and now he is stranded and has nothing but a backache and backpack. In the coming days he goes back to begging, but just like at the start, he sees an old man smoking and asks for a cigarette. Guy says, "How old are you?" And he says, "Old enough to be your dad." Man says, "Okay, here," just for being confident, and the thought of what the tall man said, he hears his laugh, then thinks of home, then thinks of all the times he couldn't stand up and do something, stares off for all of a second. Then looks at the man holding out a lighter. "You want me to smoke it for ya?" He looks at him and heart painfully, lights up, then walks off again, feeling his pocket and remembering the peace that joint brought him. He seeks solace in the one place in a month he's found it. As he smokes, he thinks maybe I'll just try and figure things out here, falls back asleep, and this is where I end James' story, because this is where we see the beginning of many homeless people, and there can only be more darkness to describe. As I look back, this is how I and people I knew came up. You see the love others feel, growing up in abusive homes. wishing you had the social skills to be anything but what you are, the wish that you could feel what others showed with others, but while a decade can pass feeling dead inside, you will do the stupidest things. Sleep outside to feel liberated, beg for money to know how society appreciates you, but while they discriminate. Nobody asks why you are here. Not safe, not secure, not loved or stable. But primarily why you are asking them for money they know you didn't earn, and if you think once you've flipped, you're just comfy with men. That's just not how human psyches work. Beat you at all, Robert Rich, identical premise. While you contemplate why every single gay village has homeless shelters right inside, or on the next street, ask what the city planners were thinking, the intention, the objectivity of donations. Just Google it, that's Canadian as child abuse. Flipping American as apple guy, sincerely, Socrates.
Thanks for listening. Click the like or subscribe buttons to support this channel.